Hello and welcome back to LPBW Update, your number one source for the latest news and deepest insights into the Roloff family. What we are about to reveal today is a story that has been developing behind the scenes, pieced together from insider reports and exclusive theories from sources close to the family. This isn't just another farm dispute or a family disagreement. This is a story of the ultimate betrayal, a calculated move that threatened to sever the foundational promises of the Roloff legacy. We're talking about a secret document, a multi-million-dollar life insurance policy, and a manipulation so profound it could shatter the family forever. At the heart of it all is a bombshell allegation that Caryn Chandler secretly and methodically removed all four of Matt Roloff's children as the beneficiaries of his life insurance, replacing them with a single name, her own. Before we dive into the shocking details of this alleged beneficiary betrayal, if you believe in protecting family legacies and want to stay on top of every breaking development in the little people, big world universe, do me a huge favor. Take a moment to hit that like button, subscribe to LPBW Update, and ring that notification bell. Your support allows us to dig deeper and bring you the stories that no one else is covering. Now, let's get into it. To truly understand the gravity of this situation, we have to go back, not just a few years, but decades. We have to return to a time when Roloff Farms wasn't just a business, but a shared dream. A dream built by Matt and Amy Roloff hand in hand with a singular, unified vision for their four children, Jeremy, Zachary, Molly, and Jacob. Sources who have known the family since the beginning speak of this era with a sense of reverence. It was a time of immense struggle, but also immense hope. Every fence post hammered into the ground, every pumpkin patch planted, every single dollar earned was an investment in a future that belonged to their kids. The farm was more than just land. It was a promise. It was meant to be a sanctuary, a birthright, and a lasting legacy that would provide for their children and their children's children. Matt, with his boundless ambition and entrepreneurial spirit, was always the visionary, but he was also acutely aware of his own mortality and the physical challenges he faced. He knew that the greatest risk to his family's future was the potential for his own untimely departure. This wasn't a morbid obsession. It was the practical concern of a loving father and husband. According to our insider reports, this led to a series of deep, heartfelt conversations between Matt and Amy in the late 1990s. They weren't just planning for the farm's next season, they were planning for the family's survival in a worst-case scenario. The result of these conversations was the creation of what is known in the financial world as a key person life insurance policy. Now, for those unfamiliar, a key person policy is a specific type of life insurance taken out by a business to compensate for the financial losses that would arise from the death or extended incapacity of a critical member of the business. In this case, that key person was Matt Roloff. He was the driving force, the architect of the farm's success. The policy was substantial, reportedly a multi-million-dollar policy designed to do two very specific things. First, it would ensure that the business, Roloff Farms, would have an immediate cash infusion to continue operations, pay off any outstanding debts, and navigate the transition without its primary leader. It was a shield to protect the farm itself from collapsing under the weight of his absence. But more importantly, and this is the critical detail at the heart of this entire story, the beneficiaries were explicitly and carefully chosen to reflect the core purpose of the family's mission. The policy named Amy Roloff as the primary trustee and all four children, Zachary, Jeremy, Molly, and Jacob, as equal inheritors. This document was more than just a financial instrument. It was a sacred pact. It was Matt and Amy's written promise to their kids, a guarantee that no matter what happened to their father, their future, their security, and their stake in the legacy they were raised to inherit would be absolutely, unequivocally protected. It was, in the words of one source, the ultimate safety net, the foundational act of love that underpinned everything they were building. This policy was a cornerstone of the Roloff family charter, a silent testament to the idea that family always, always came first. For years, this policy sat quietly in Matt's extensive financial portfolio, a sleeping guardian of the family's future. The premiums were paid, the paperwork was filed away, and life, with all its televised drama and private struggles, went on. The marriage between Matt and Amy eventually dissolved, a painful and public process that saw the division of assets and the redrawing of many personal and financial lines. But according to our sources, this specific policy was left untouched. It was considered separate, a pre-existing promise to the children that transcended the marital split. It was part of the farm's business structure, and as long as the farm was intended to be a family legacy, the policy's purpose remained the same. Enter Caryn Chandler. Her evolution from a farm employee to Matt's partner and confidant is a well-documented part of the show's narrative. She became an increasingly influential figure in Matt's life, both personally and professionally. She was by his side for business decisions, for health scares, and for the day-to-day management of his world. As Matt's reliance on her grew, so did her access to his life, including the intricate details of his financial affairs. Our investigation has uncovered reports that within the last couple of years, Caryn took on a more active role in organizing and streamlining Matt's extensive portfolio. It was presented as a helpful act, an effort to bring order to a lifetime of complex business dealings and investments. Matt, who has always focused on the big picture, reportedly gave her significant latitude, trusting her to handle the minutiae. It was during one of these organizing sessions in the quiet of Matt's office, surrounded by binders and file folders, that Caryn allegedly stumbled upon the key person's life insurance policy. According to an exclusive theory from a source with knowledge of the farm's administrative history, the document would have stood out. It wasn't just another investment account. It was a foundational document, likely bearing the signatures of a much younger Matt and Amy. As she read the details, the scale of it all would have become clear. The multi-million-dollar payout. And then the list of beneficiaries: Amy Roloff, Zachary Roloff, Jeremy Roloff, Molly Roloff, Jacob Roloff. For anyone else, this would have been a historical document, a testament to a father's love. But what our sources allege is that for Caryn, it was something else entirely. It was a mirror reflecting a reality she desperately wanted to change. It was a powerful, legally binding document that cemented the unshakable primacy of Amy and the children in the financial legacy of the man she loved. It was a multi-million-dollar symbol of a life and a family of which she was not and could never truly be the foundation. The report suggests that a toxic cocktail of emotions began to swirl. Jealousy of the bond that document represented, resentment of Amy's permanent place in the family's financial bedrock, and a surge of raw, unadulterated greed. The policy wasn't just a safety net for the kids. It became, in her eyes, the ultimate prize, the key to her own absolute financial security, forever. But how could she possibly change it? It was a legal document. It would require Matt's signature, his explicit consent. A healthy, clear-minded Matt Roloff, the patriarch who had spent his life proclaiming his devotion to his children's future, would never knowingly sign away their birthright. He would never agree to remove his 4 children from a policy designed specifically to protect them. Caryn, being the astute observer that she is, allegedly knew this. A direct approach was impossible. It would expose her motives and likely destroy her relationship with Matt. So, according to the timeline of events we have pieced together, she waited. She filed the policy away, but the knowledge of its existence festered. She needed an opportunity, a moment of weakness, a crack in Matt's formidable defenses. That opportunity allegedly arrived several months ago during a particularly harsh flu season in Oregon. Matt, like so many others, was hit hard. This wasn't just a common cold. Sources who were on the farm during this period describe him as being severely ill, bedridden for days with a high fever, body aches, and a debilitating cough. He was, in their words, completely out of it. To manage the severe symptoms, he was on a regimen of powerful cold and flu medications, medications known to cause drowsiness, confusion, and impaired judgment. He was physically weak and mentally foggy, his world reduced to the four walls of his bedroom. During this time, Caryn was his primary caregiver, controlling who saw him, managing his medication, and handling all his affairs. This was the moment of vulnerability she had been waiting for. With Matt in a weakened, heavily medicated, and suggestible state, she allegedly made her move. She gathered a stack of what appeared to be routine financial documents, tax forms, investment updates, standard farm business papers that required his signature. She approached him while he was resting, his mind clouded by fever and medicine. Buried deep within this stack of innocuous paperwork was a single devastating page, an official change of beneficiary form for the key person life insurance policy. The deception, as described by our sources, was masterful in its simplicity. She didn't make a big deal of it. She didn't draw attention to the specific form. With a calm and reassuring tone, she reportedly presented the entire stack to him. "Honey, just a few things that need your signature," she might have said. "Just some small updates for the insurance records, a few routine things for the portfolio." She likely guided his hand, pointing to the signature lines, her words a soothing balm over a treacherous act. Matt, trusting, sick, and barely coherent, would have seen no reason to suspect anything. To him, it was just another piece of paper in a pile of papers, presented by the person he trusted most. He scrawled his signature, a shaky confirmation born of weakness and deception, and handed the stack back to her. The deed was done. In the stroke of a pen, a sacred promise made to his children was allegedly broken, and their financial safety net was stolen from beneath them. Caryn would have then discreetly separated the beneficiary form from the rest of the documents and mailed it to the insurance company. From her perspective, the plan was flawless. Matt would recover from his illness with no memory of the specific document he signed. The insurance company would process the change, and the updated policy would sit silently in the files, her name now the sole recipient of the multi-million-dollar payout. She had, in her mind, secured her future and supplanted the original family as the ultimate inheritor of Matt's financial legacy. It was a silent coup, a betrayal that no one would ever discover until it was too late. But she made one critical miscalculation. She underestimated the lingering, bureaucratic tendrils of a 25-year marriage and business partnership. When a major change, like a beneficiary designation, is made on a life insurance policy, the company is legally required to send out a confirmation letter. It's a standard procedure, a paper trail to confirm that the requested changes have been processed and recorded. This letter detailing the updated beneficiary designation was automatically generated and sent out. The primary mailing address on the policy was, of course, Matt's address at the farm. But here is where fate, or perhaps clerical oversight, intervened in a way no one could have predicted. Years ago, when Matt and Amy were still running the farm as a joint partnership, they had a P.O. box set up for official business mail. When they divorced, the assets were divided and addresses were updated. However, due to a small, forgotten oversight in the mountain of paperwork, Amy's name was never fully removed as a secondary contact for certain legacy partnership correspondence linked to that old P.O. box. It was a relic of their shared past, a loose thread that was never tied up. And it was to this P.O. box that a duplicate of the confirmation letter was sent. Amy, as part of her routine, still checked this P.O. box occasionally for any stray pieces of mail. On a completely ordinary Tuesday afternoon, she unlocked the small metal door and pulled out a handful of envelopes. Most of it was junk mail, old catalogs, and maybe a stray bill. But one envelope stood out. It was from the insurance company, a major, well-known firm. It was addressed to the Roloff family partnership. Her first thought was that it was likely an old policy update or a standard annual statement she'd forgotten about. There was no sense of alarm, just mild curiosity. She opened the letter casually, perhaps while walking back to her car, and then her world stopped. The words on the page seemed to leap out at her, cold and clinical. At the top, in bold letters, it read, "Confirmation of beneficiary change." Her heart likely began to beat a little faster. She scanned the document. It referenced the key person policy, the one they had set up together all those years ago. The one she knew was for the kids. And then she saw the two crucial sections. The first was labeled previous beneficiaries. Her eyes traced the familiar names, a list that was etched into her heart. Amy Roloff, Zachary Roloff, Jeremy Roloff, Molly Roloff, Jacob Roloff. It was the pact, the promise, the safety net. Then her eyes dropped to the next section, the one labeled updated beneficiary designation, effective date. Her breath caught in her throat. Her mind couldn't process what her eyes were seeing. It felt like a mistake, a typo, a cruel joke. But there it was, in crisp black ink, a single name where there should have been 5. A name that was not a Roloff, a name that had no claim to the legacy she and Matt had bled for. The letter explicitly stated that the sole beneficiary for the multi-million-dollar policy was now Caryn Chandler. The implications of this washed over her in waves of ice. First, confusion. This had to be wrong. Matt would never, ever do this. He loved his children more than anything. He built this farm for them. It was his life's work, his stated purpose. But the document in her shaking hands was an official confirmation. It was real. Then came the second wave, a deep, soul-crushing hurt. It felt like a dagger not just to her, but to the very idea of their family. And finally, the third wave arrived, a cold, clarifying rage. She realized the true depth of the betrayal. Caryn hadn't just added her name to the policy. She hadn't just tried to secure a piece for herself. She had actively and deliberately removed his children. She had erased them. This wasn't about securing her own future. This was about stealing her children's. It was a declaration of war on the Roloff family legacy. Amy stood there, the letter trembling in her hand, the world fading to a dull hum around her. This was not a misunderstanding. This was the unthinkable truth. And in that moment, a devastating realization settled upon her. She had to confront them. This secret could not be allowed to stand. The future of her family depended on it. The moments after Amy Roloff read that letter were a vortex of silent chaos. The sounds of the post office lobby, the clang of a closing box, the low murmur of conversations faded into an indistinct buzz. The world, which had stopped for a moment, came rushing back in a distorted, horrifying clarity. The crisp white paper in her hand felt impossibly heavy, a tombstone marking the death of a promise. Our sources describe this as a moment of profound and chilling transformation. There was no theatrical gasp, no public outcry. The fiery, often emotional Amy that viewers have seen over the years was gone, replaced by something far more formidable. A woman consumed by a cold, diamond-hard fury. This wasn't a betrayal of a wife by a husband's new partner. In Amy's eyes, this was a predator targeting her children. And like any mother protecting her cubs, her every instinct was now focused on a single, unwavering purpose: justice. She walked back to her car, her movements deliberate and controlled. She didn't crumple the letter. She folded it precisely, clinically, and placed it in her purse as if it were a piece of critical evidence, which, of course, it was. The drive home was an eternity. Every landmark, a familiar barn, a turn in the road, the distant silhouette of Roloff Farms itself, was a reminder of the life she and Matt had built, the very foundation this document sought to demolish. Memories flooded her mind, not of the fights in the divorce, but of the early days. She remembered late-night conversations with Matt about their dreams for the kids, the fear in their hearts when one of them was sick, the shared pride in their accomplishments. She remembered the day they signed the original policy, the feeling of relief knowing that, come what may, their children would be taken care of. That document was their pledge, sealed in ink, a testament to a love that was supposed to outlast their marriage, and Caryn had taken that pledge, that history, and attempted to incinerate it for cash. By the time she pulled into her own driveway, the plan had already formed in her mind. This was not a secret she would carry alone. This was not a private battle to be fought with Matt behind closed doors. A wound this deep, inflicted upon the entire family, had to be exposed to the entire family. The children had a right to know the truth. They had a right to face the person who had tried to disinherit them. And Matt had to see the faces of his children as he answered for what had been done in his name. It was the only way for the true weight of this betrayal to be felt. She went inside, sat at her kitchen table, and took out her phone. Her hands were steady. Her voice, when she made the first call, was calm, almost unnervously so. There was no hint of panic, only an unyielding gravity. One by one, she called her children. The conversations were brief and to the point. To Zach, then Jeremy, then Molly, then Jacob. The message was the same for each of them. I need you to come to my house tomorrow evening at 7. It's a family meeting. It is extremely important that you be there. When they inevitably asked what it was about, she held firm. We will discuss it when everyone is here. All I will say is that it concerns the farm and the future of our family. And then she added the final critical instruction. I need you to make sure your father and Caryn are here as well. Tell them it's not optional. The kids were, according to our reports, immediately unsettled. Their mother's tone was unlike anything they had ever heard. It was devoid of her usual warmth, replaced by an icy resolve. Zach and Tori would have been filled with concern, speculating if Matt's health had taken a turn for the worse. Jeremy and Audrey likely sensed a major business bombshell, perhaps Matt finally deciding to sell the entire north side of the farm. Molly, ever the pragmatist, would have been worried about the legal or financial implications of such a cryptic summons. And Jacob, always suspicious of the family power dynamics, would have immediately assumed it was a major confrontation in the making. They all agreed to be there. The stage was set. The next 24 hours were thick with a tense, unspoken anticipation. The kids who delivered the message to Matt reported that his reaction was one of pure bewilderment and a touch of annoyance. He saw it as another classic Amy drama, an unnecessary summit for something that could be handled with a phone call. He couldn't fathom what could be so urgent as to require everyone's presence. He complained about his schedule, about the work that needed to be done on the farm, but the insistence from his children was so strong that he reluctantly agreed. For Caryn, however, the news of this meeting would have landed like a grenade. An emergency family meeting, called by Amy, mandatory attendance. For her, our sources paint a picture of a woman gripped by a sudden, chilling panic. Her mind would have raced through 1,000 possibilities. Could Amy have found out? How? It was impossible. The letter would have gone to Matt. He would have seen it, and if he didn't remember signing it, he probably would have just filed it away. He certainly wouldn't have given it to Amy. She would have desperately tried to reassure herself. It had to be about something else. Maybe Amy was upset about the new house build. Maybe it was another argument over pumpkin season logistics. She projected an air of nonchalant dismissal to Matt. "Oh, you know how she gets," she likely said, a forced casualness in her voice. "Probably wants to complain about the property line again. Don't worry about it, honey." But inside, a cold dread was beginning to take root. She knew this was different. The inclusion of her in a mandatory meeting with all the kids on Amy's turf was a red flag of the highest order. The following evening, the atmosphere at Amy's house was electric with tension. The four Roloff children arrived first, gathering in the living room, their faces etched with anxiety and curiosity. They exchanged theories in hushed tones, the air thick with the weight of the unknown. Amy greeted them each with a hug, but her embrace was tight, her demeanor sere. She didn't offer any information, simply telling them to have a seat and wait. She moved about the room with a quiet, steely composure, a general preparing her battlefield. Then, headlights swept across the window. Matt and Caryn were here. The kids fell silent as the front door opened. Matt walked in, a look of impatient confusion on his face, ready to get this over with. Caryn followed a step behind him, a practiced, pleasant smile plastered on her face, a mask of normalcy that did little to hide the apprehension in her eyes. The greetings were stiff and awkward. "Hey, Dad." "Hi, Caryn." The small talk died before it could even begin. The eight of them, a fractured family and its divisive new matriarch in waiting, sat down in Amy's living room. The silence was deafening. Amy remained standing for a moment, looking at each person in the room. Her gaze lingered on her children, a flash of pain and love in her eyes, before settling on Matt and, finally, on Caryn. When she spoke, her voice was low, but it carried to every corner of the silent room. "I asked you all to come here tonight because a promise has been broken," she began, her words measured and heavy. "A foundational promise, one that was made before the TV shows, before the divorces, before everything changed. It was a promise Matt and I made to our children, to ensure their security and to protect the legacy we were building for them." Matt shifted uncomfortably, looking at her with a mix of irritation and confusion. "Amy, what in the world are you talking about? What promise?" Caryn sat perfectly still, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her smile frozen in place. Her heart was likely pounding against her ribs. Amy didn't answer Matt directly. Instead, she walked to the small table beside her chair, picked up her purse, and took out a single folded piece of paper. The confirmation letter. She walked to the coffee table that sat in the center of the room and placed the letter down, smoothing it out with her hand. It lay there, face up under the lamplight. The bolded words, "Confirmation of beneficiary change," were visible to everyone. She looked directly at Caryn, her eyes boring into her. Then she spoke the two words that would detonate their lives. "Explain this." A wave of confusion rippled through the children. Zach leaned forward, squinting to read the paper. Jeremy and Jacob exchanged a look. Matt, his patience finally snapping, reached out and snatched the letter from the table. "Explain what? Let me see that." He held it up, his eyes scanning the page. The room was so quiet, you could hear the rustle of the paper in his hands. He read the top line. He read the policy number, a number he vaguely recognized from decades of financial statements. He read the section titled Previous Beneficiaries. He saw the names: Amy, Zach, Jeremy, Molly, Jacob. A flicker of memory. Yes, the key person policy, for the kids, for the farm. And then his eyes fell to the next section, the updated beneficiary designation. He read the single name printed there, Caryn Chandler. For a full 10 seconds, he just stared at it. His brain refused to compute. He looked up at Amy, his face a mask of utter disbelief. "This is a joke, right? This is fake. Where did you get this? This is some kind of sick forgery." He turned to his children, his voice rising with defensive panic. I would never ever do this. You know that. I would never take you kids off this policy. This isn't real. Caryn saw her opening, a chance to sow chaos and doubt. She reached out and put a hand on Matt's arm, her voice filled with feigned concern. Matt, honey, calm down. Of course you wouldn't. This has to be a mistake from the insurance company. You know how they mess up paperwork all the time. We can call them in the morning and sort this all out. Amy, you shouldn't be upsetting everyone like this with some clerical error. But Amy didn't even look at her. Her eyes were locked on Matt. It's not a forgery, Matt, and it's not a clerical error. Look at the bottom of the page. That's your signature, isn't it? Matt's eyes darted back to the paper. And there it was, his signature, shaky, a little sloppier than usual, but undeniably his. The sight of it seemed to knock the air out of him. He sank back into the couch, the letter trembling in his hand. No, he whispered. No, I didn't sign this. It was Jeremy who spoke first, his voice sharp with dawning comprehension. He was looking directly at Caryn. When was this signed? The letter has a date. Matt looked at the effective date of the change. It was from about 2 months ago. His mind was blank. And then Zach, his face pale, spoke, his voice cracking with hurt. 2 months ago, Dad, that's when you had that really bad flu. The one where you were in bed for almost 2 weeks. And just like that, a fog in Matt's memory began to clear. Not a clear picture, but fragmented images. The feeling of being weak, so weak he could barely sit up, the taste of cough syrup, the blur of daytime television, and a memory, faint and hazy, of Caryn at his bedside. She had a stack of papers. Her voice was soft, reassuring. Just a few things to sign, honey. Routine updates. Don't worry, just sign here. He remembered the feel of the pen in his hand, his fingers clumsy. He remembered signing page after page without reading, trusting her completely, wanting nothing more than to go back to sleep. He looked up from the letter, his eyes slowly moving from the heartbroken faces of his children to the woman sitting beside him. The woman who had been his caregiver, the woman he trusted with his life. He saw the flicker of panic in her eyes, the way her smile had vanished, replaced by a mask of brittle defense. You, he said, his voice barely a whisper, you brought me papers when I was sick. Caryn's facade finally began to crumble. Matt, we sign papers all the time. For the business, for taxes. You were so out of it, you probably don't remember. It was all a big stack. Maybe the financial advisor slipped this in by mistake. It's not my fault. She was scrambling, deflecting, trying to create any other plausible scenario. But the kids weren't buying it. Jacob, who had been simmering with a quiet rage, finally exploded. A mistake? A mistake? You mistakenly removed all 4 of us and mistakenly made yourself the only one on a multi-million-dollar policy? That's not a mistake. That's a heist. You tried to steal our inheritance, Caryn. Molly, who rarely raised her voice, spoke with a quiet devastation that cut deeper than Jacob's anger. I don't understand how you could do that to us, to Dad. You used him. Zach just shook his head, the look of betrayal on his face so profound it was like a physical blow to Matt. All those years, Zach said, his voice thick with emotion. All that talk about legacy, about the farm being for us, was any of it real, Dad? That question shattered Matt Roloff. He was looking at the tangible results of his weakness, his blind trust. His children weren't just angry, they were wounded to their core. The very foundation of their relationship with him, his promise to protect them, had been violated. The memory was now crystal clear in his mind. Caryn's face, the stack of papers, her soothing voice telling him not to worry. He realized she had waited. She had planned this. She had targeted him at his absolute weakest moment to exploit his trust and betray the most sacred vow a father can make. He turned his head slowly and looked at Caryn. The confusion was gone. The denial was gone. All that remained was the horrifying, sickening weight of the truth. The woman he loved, the woman he had planned to marry, had used his love and his illness to attempt to disinherit his children for her own gain. It was the ultimate betrayal, a calculated act of breathtaking greed and cruelty. Caryn saw the look on his face and knew the game was over. All the lies, all the deflections had evaporated. She was exposed. In a last desperate attempt, her voice took on a pleading, hysterical tone. I did it for us, Matt, for our future, so you wouldn't have to worry, so I would be secure if something happened to you. They all have their own lives, their own careers. We're the ones building a life together now. It was for us. Her confession hung in the air, more damning than any accusation. She had admitted it. She had admitted her motive was pure, selfish greed, wrapped in the guise of love. Matt just stared at her, his face ashen. The life they had built together, the future he had envisioned, turned to dust in that single horrifying moment. He felt the heartbroken eyes of his 4 children on him, waiting. He opened his mouth, but for a moment, no sound came out. Then he spoke, his voice quiet, devoid of anger, filled only with a vast, empty sense of devastation. Get out, he said. Caryn stared at him, shocked. What? Get out of this house, now. There were no more arguments, no more tears. Caryn stood up, her face a mixture of shock, rage, and defeat. She gave Amy a look of pure hatred before turning and walking out the door, slamming it behind her. Silence descended upon the room once more. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, filled with the wreckage of what had just occurred. Matt sat slumped on the couch, the letter still clutched in his hand. He couldn't bring himself to look at his kids. He had failed them in the most fundamental way. Amy stood by the fireplace, her arms crossed, her face a stoic mask, though her heart was breaking for her children. The family was in ruins, shattered by a betrayal so profound it seemed impossible to recover from. The immediate threat was gone, but the damage was done. Can a family ever truly heal from a wound this deep? Can trust, once so completely obliterated, ever be rebuilt? Matt Roloff was left alone in a room filled with the children he adored, now separated from them by a chasm of his own making, facing a future where every promise he had ever made now rang hollow. The ultimate betrayal had been exposed, but the true consequences were only just beginning to unfold. The slamming of the front door was a gunshot in the silent room, an echo of the life that had just been blown apart. For a long, agonizing minute, nobody moved. The 7 Roloffs were frozen in a tableau of shock and devastation. Matt remained a collapsed figure on the couch, the damning letter still clutched in his fists, his face a ghastly shade of white. His children weren't looking at him. They were staring at the door, as if they could still see the ghost of the woman who had just exited their lives, a woman who had, moments before, been a fixture in their father's world and, by extension, their own. The air was thick with unspoken accusations, with the raw, bleeding wounds of betrayal. Amy was the first to break the spell. She moved from her position by the fireplace, her steps measured. She didn't go to Matt. Her priority, as it had always been, was her children. She went to Zach, who was sitting rigid, his jaw clenched, his eyes filled with a pain so deep it was startling. She placed a hand on his shoulder, a simple, grounding gesture. She looked at Jeremy, at Molly, at Jacob. Her eyes communicated everything she couldn't say out loud. I know, I'm sorry, we will get through this. It was Matt who finally broke the silence. His voice was a ragged, broken thing, a whisper that barely carried across the room. I'm so sorry, he said, the words catching in his throat. He wasn't looking at them. He was looking at his hands, at the wrinkled paper that represented his greatest failure as a father. I had no idea. I swear to you, I never would have. I trusted her. The words hung there, a pathetic and insufficient defense. Jacob let out a short, bitter laugh. You trusted her, he repeated, not as a question, but as a judgment. You trusted her more than your own family. We've been telling you for years, Dad. We've been trying to warn you about her, about what she was really after. You called us jealous. You said we were bitter, but we saw it. We saw this. Jacob, not now, Jeremy cautioned, his voice low, but Jacob was on his feet, pacing the room like a caged animal. No, now is exactly the time, Igasa. He shot back, his voice rising. He needs to hear this. She didn't just do this today. This has been a long, slow con, and he let it happen. He invited the wolf into the hen house and handed her the keys. That's enough, Amy said, her voice sharp, cutting through Jacob's anger. Your father knows what he did. He knows the mistake he made. Look at him. They all looked at their father. He seemed to have aged a decade in the last 10 minutes. He was diminished, a shell of the confident, commanding patriarch they knew. The sight seemed to drain the fight out of Jacob. He slumped back into his chair, running a hand over his face. The anger was still there, but it was now tempered by the tragic sight of his father's complete undoing. Matt finally lifted his head, and his eyes were glistening with tears. He looked at each of his children, his gaze begging for an absolution he knew he didn't deserve. What she did, it's unforgivable, he said, his voice cracking, but what I did, my blindness, my stupidity, I don't know how I can ever fix this. I broke my promise to you, the most important promise. The room was quiet again. The emotional storm momentarily passed, leaving behind a landscape of wreckage. There were no easy answers here. There was no hug that could mend this. The trust that had been the bedrock of their family, already fractured by divorce and farm disputes, had now been pulverized. Matt had not just been a victim of a con, he had been a willing participant in his own deception, choosing to ignore the warnings of his own children in favor of the sweet reassurances of a woman who had been playing the long game all along. The meeting broke apart without a real conclusion. There was nothing more to say. The kids left one by one, their goodbyes to their father strained and distant. They hugged their mother tightly, a silent acknowledgement that she had been their protector, the one who had unearthed the rot before it was too late. Amy watched them go, her heart aching for them. After they were gone, only she and Matt remained in the quiet living room. He was still on the couch, looking lost and alone. You need to go home, Matt, she said, her voice not unkind but firm. There was no room for pity. There was only the hard reality of what needed to happen next. Home? He asked, the word sounding foreign. What home? She's there. Then you will tell her to leave, Amy stated simply. That house, this farm, it belongs to this family. She has no place there anymore. You need to fix this, not just the paperwork. You need to fix this. She gestured around her, at the empty room, at the space that represented their entire family. And with that, she left him alone with his thoughts and his shame. The drive back to the farm was the longest of Matt Roloff's life. Each turn of the wheel was a turn of the knife in his gut. He thought of the new house they were building, the dream home that was supposed to be their forever place. It now seemed like a monument to his own foolishness. He thought of all the times he had defended Caryn to his kids, the arguments, the accusations he had hurled at them. He had called them ungrateful and told them they needed to accept her, and all the while she was planning to strip them of their birthright. When he pulled up to his house, the double wide, he saw the lights were on. Part of him hoped she would already be gone, that she would have had the decency to pack her things and disappear. But he knew better. Caryn was a fighter. She wouldn't give up that easily. He took a deep breath, steeling himself, and walked inside. She was in the living room, surrounded by suitcases. She had been crying, but when she saw him, her expression hardened. So that's it? She spat. You let them do this? You let her win? After everything I have done for you, you just threw me out on the street because of some misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? Matt's voice was dangerously quiet. The broken man from Amy's couch was gone. replaced by the cold fury of a king who had discovered a traitor in his court. You call trying to steal millions of dollars from my children a misunderstanding? You call using me when I was sick and half-conscious a misunderstanding? I want you to pack your things and be gone by morning. And I want the keys to your car, the keys to this house, and every credit card linked to my accounts on the table before you go. Caryn stared at him, her mouth agape. The pleading was gone, replaced by a venomous rage. You can't do this, Matt. We have a life together. I gave up years for you, for this farm. I have rights. You have no rights, Matt said, his voice like ice. You were an employee, and then you were my girlfriend. You are not my wife. You have no legal claim to anything. What you did tonight was not just a betrayal. It was attempted theft. Be grateful I don't call the police. Now get out of my sight. He turned and walked into his office, closing the door behind him, leaving her standing amidst the ruins of her failed coup. He spent the night on the small couch in his office, unable to sleep, the events of the evening replaying in his mind like a horror film. In the morning, as promised, she was gone. A set of keys and a pile of plastic cards lay on the kitchen counter. The silence in the house was absolute, a testament to the void she had left behind and the even bigger void she had created within his family. The days that followed were a blur of damage control and painful reflection. Matt's first call was to the insurance company. The conversation was surreal. He spoke to a senior representative, explaining the situation in clipped professional tones, carefully omitting the more sordid details. He claimed the change had been made in error and needed to be reversed immediately. The representative was cooperative, but the process was not instantaneous. There were forms to be signed, this time notarized, and a waiting period for confirmation. As a chilling final note, the representative confirmed that the change request signed by him had been perfectly legal and had been fully processed. It was a cold, bureaucratic confirmation of how close Caryn had come to succeeding. His next call was to his lawyer. He explained the entire situation, the vulnerability, the manipulation, the confrontation. The lawyer was blunt. Matt had been incredibly lucky. If Amy hadn't intercepted that letter, the change would have remained in effect, and the children would have had a difficult, if not impossible, legal battle to fight after his death. The conversation then turned to the future. The lawyer strongly advised a complete overhaul of his estate plan. His will, his trust, the farm succession plan, everything needed to be revisited and fortified to make it ironclad, protecting his children from any future claims or contests. Matt agreed without hesitation. It was the first concrete step he could take to begin earning back their trust. Meanwhile, the children were processing the trauma in their own ways. We have reports from sources close to the family that Zach and Tori were particularly devastated. For Zach, this felt like the ultimate confirmation of his long-held fears. He had always been skeptical of Caryn's influence, and the fight over the farm sale had already created a deep chasm between him and his father. This new betrayal felt personal and profound. It wasn't just about money, it was about his father's judgment and love. It called into question every promise Matt had ever made. He reportedly told Tori, "How can I ever believe anything he says again?" He was willing to let her erase us. The idea of bringing his own children, Jackson and Lila, back to the farm, a place now so deeply tainted by this event, felt unbearable. Jeremy and Audrey, living their own life away from the farm, were said to be more analytical, yet equally furious. Jeremy, who had long felt a sense of entitlement to the Roloff legacy, saw this as an attack on the very name. He and his father had their own complex history, but there had always been a baseline of paternal love. This act shattered that baseline. Exclusive theories suggest Jeremy felt that Matt had allowed the brand of the Roloff family to be compromised, and he was deeply concerned about the long-term implications. Molly, ever the quiet and private one, was reportedly deeply hurt but also pragmatic. A source suggests she had a long phone call with her father where she didn't yell but calmly explained how deeply he had broken her trust. She wasn't interested in the drama. She was interested in the security that had been promised to them, a promise her father had almost allowed to be broken. And Jacob, along with Isabel, felt a dark sense of vindication. He had been the most outspoken critic of Caryn in the show's manufactured reality for years. This event, in his eyes, was the inevitable, ugly conclusion to the path his father had chosen. While he felt the sting of the betrayal, a larger part of him felt that the truth was finally out in the open for everyone to see. While the Roloffs were reeling, Caryn Chandler was not idle. She did not simply vanish into the Oregon mist. Reports began to surface that she was staying with a friend in a nearby town and had begun her own counteroffensive. She was not going to be painted as the villain without a fight. She started reaching out to mutual friends, to former farm employees, to anyone who would listen, spinning her own version of the story. In her telling, she was the victim. She framed the beneficiary change not as an act of greed, but as an act of love and protection. Matt is so disorganized with his finances, she reportedly told one friend. I was just trying to streamline things. He told me he wanted me to be secure if anything happened to him. The kids have their own money from the show. Amy twisted the whole thing because she's always been jealous of me. She saw a chance to get rid of me, and she took it. This narrative began to circulate, creating confusion and division among those on the periphery of the Roloff world. It was a classic manipulation tactic. Create enough doubt and noise to muddy the waters, to reframe the perpetrator as the victim. Furthermore, we received an exclusive tip from a source with connections in the legal community that Caryn had consulted with a high-profile attorney. The speculation was that she was exploring her options. Could she sue for palimony? Could she claim she was an instrumental business partner and was owed a stake in the farm's recent growth? The threat of a messy public legal battle now loomed over the family, a second front opening up in a war they thought was over. Matt, hearing whispers of this counter-narrative, knew that words were no longer enough. He had to act. He had to prove to his children that his apology was not just a fleeting reaction to getting caught. He began what his inner circle started calling his apology tour, a series of one-on-one meetings with each of his children, away from the cameras and the drama. His meeting with Zach was the most difficult. They met at a neutral location, a coffee shop halfway between their homes. Matt laid everything bare. He didn't make excuses. He admitted his arrogance, his blindness, and the profound mistake he had made in trusting Caryn over the instincts of his own son. I failed you, Zach, he said, his voice thick with emotion. As a father, I failed you. I allowed someone to come between me and my children, and I almost let her destroy our family's future. I can't take back the hurt, but I can spend the rest of my life making it right. Zach listened, his expression unreadable. He didn't offer immediate forgiveness. He simply said, "Actions, Dad, that's all I care about now. I need to see the actions." With Jeremy, the conversation was more about the idea of legacy. Matt admitted that in his pursuit of a new life with Caryn, he had lost sight of the original mission of the farm. He had allowed his personal happiness to cloud his judgment as the steward of the Roloff legacy. He shared with Jeremy his plans to fortify their inheritance legally, to ensure that nothing like this could ever happen again. A few weeks after the initial confrontation, Matt called for another family meeting. But this time, the tone was entirely different. It was held at his house on the farm, a place he was trying to reclaim from the ghosts of his recent past. His lawyer was present, not as a threat, but as a facilitator. Caryn was gone, scrubbed from the property and his life. When the children and Amy arrived, they found a stack of official-looking, leather-bound portfolios on the coffee table. Matt stood before them, humbled and sober. "There's nothing I can say that will erase what happened," he began. So I'm not going to try, as Zach told me it's about actions now. He then turned the floor over to his lawyer, who proceeded to walk them through a series of new ironclad legal documents. There was the updated and reconfirmed life insurance policy, once again naming Amy as trustee and the 4 children as equal sole beneficiaries. There was a newly drafted last will and testament that explicitly detailed the division of all of his assets, including the farm, among his 4 children. And most importantly, there was a new irrevocable family trust designed to protect the farm's assets from any and all outside claims, ensuring that the Roloff legacy would pass to the Roloff children and their descendants, period. He had legally bound himself to the promise he had broken. As the lawyer finished, Matt handed each of his children their own copy of the portfolio. "This is my promise to you," he said, his voice steady for the first time in weeks. "In writing, legally binding, it's the best I can do to prove that you, all 4 of you, are and always will be my priority. I know it will take a long time to earn back your trust. For some of you, it may never fully come back. I have to live with that. But I will spend the rest of my days showing you that I mean this." The atmosphere in the room was not one of celebration, but of somber relief. A catastrophic wound had been sutured. It would leave a hideous scar, a permanent reminder of the betrayal, but the bleeding had stopped. Amy watched the scene, a quiet sense of vindication in her heart. She had acted, she had protected her family, and she had forced a painful but necessary reckoning. She caught Matt's eye across the room, and for the first time since their divorce, there was a flicker of the old partnership, a shared understanding of their unbreakable bond as parents. The beneficiary betrayal, as it would come to be known within the family's private history, was over. Caryn Chandler, armed with lawyers and a fabricated story, would eventually fade away, her legal threats amounting to nothing against Matt's fortified estate. The family, however, was forever changed. The easy trust between father and children was gone, replaced by a more cautious, deliberate relationship, one that would have to be rebuilt, brick by painful brick. Roloff Farms, once a symbol of a shared dream, now stood as a testament to both the fragility and the resilience of family. It had been the prize in a war they never knew was being waged, and its future, while now legally secure, was emotionally mortgaged. Matt Roloff had won back his children's inheritance, but the price was a piece of their faith in him, a price he would be paying for the rest of his life. The ultimate betrayal had been exposed and defeated, but its lessons and its scars would last forever.